Michelangelo di Lodovico Buonarroti Simoni, best known as Michelangelo, was a sculptor who was born in Italy in 1475 in the town of Caprice near Arezzo. At the age of 13, he left grammar school and studied to become an artist under Domenico Ghirlandaio, one of the most successful fresco painters in Florence at the time. Fresco means fresh in Italian, as it uses paint on wet plaster walls so the color sinks into the walls better. Michelangelo began to rise in fame after Lorenzo de' Medici, the ruler of Florence, invited him to live in the Medici household and work on a marble statue. This lasted for 2 years before Lorenzo died. Lorenzo's successor did not care for art, and Michelangelo then went to live with his father and studied anatomy through corpses at the Santo Spirito Church. In 1496, he was summoned to Rome after his statue called Sleeping Cupid affair began to rise in popularity, and Michelangelo was soon famous throughout Italy. Pope Julius II commissioned him to build a tomb of 40 statues. Michelangelo began this, but Julius soon lost interest and demanded he painted the Sistine Chapel. The Sistine Chapel was originally known as the Cappella Maggiore, translating to Greater Chapel. Pope Sixtus IV restored the Sistine Chapel between 1477 and 1480. It wasn't until about 38 years later that it was worked on once again, this time by an unwilling Michelangelo.
Michelangelo was known for his sculptures. As he had studied under Ghirlandaio, he knew how to paint frescoes, but had not done so since he was a student. He refused to do it for these very reasons, but due to the church's power, Michelangelo eventually gave in. Michelangelo soon grew to hate the Sistine Chapel. As Scientific American has published discussing the Last Supper, in 2 places in the masterpiece, Michelangelo left self-portraits, both of them depicting himself in torture. He gave his own face to St. Bartholomew's body martyred by being skinned alive, and to the severed head of Holofernes, who was seduced and beheaded by Judith. Another instance of this is his poem to Giovanni di Pistoia, in which he talks about his painting of the Sistine. In the poem he states, "My stomach squashed under my chin, my beard's pointing at heaven, my brain's crushed in a casket, my breast twists like a harpy's, my painting is dead. Defend it for me, Giovanni, protect my honor. I am not in the right place, I am not a painter." Michelangelo not only painted frescoes, he painted buon frescoes, which means true frescoes, which happened to be the hardest type of frescoes to create, meaning he had to learn this technique before he could even begin the project. Another conflict that arose during the painting of the Sistine was his trouble with Biagio da Cesena. Da Cesena was the master of ceremonies for the Pope. In Michelangelo's painting The Last Judgment, he painted da Cesena as Minos in hell, with a serpent biting his genitals. The meaning behind Minos and the serpent represents that Michelangelo thought that da Cesena was letting his desire overcome reason. This is also shown by the snake wrapping itself around Minos' leg twice, representing the second circle of hell. Although Michelangelo's exact reasoning for his betrayal of da Cesena is not known, there are some possibilities, one of which is that Biagio da Cesena had condemned the nude figures Michelangelo had painted in the church, saying that they instead belonged in a bagnio, or a brothel. Another popular theory is that Biagio demanded to see the painting before it was finished, and stormed in, ignoring Michelangelo's refusal. As revenge, da Cesena was cast as Minos on the Sistine ceiling. In any version of the story, after seeing Michelangelo's portrayal of him on the ceiling of the Sistine, Biagio demanded that it be removed. In Domenecchi's version of the story, Pope Paul III tells da Cesena that his power does not extend into hell, and therefore he cannot do anything about the painting. None of these are the confirmed reason for da Cesena's portrayal as Minos, but they are all thought to be valid options.
Another conflict between the Church and Michelangelo is the issue of homosexuality. In the 13th century, over 100 years before Michelangelo was born, the Church began to focus on condemning acts of sodomy. In this period, sodomy was a reference to any sexual relation that was not between a man and a woman for the sole purpose of procreation. In Venice, in particular, it became a dangerous spot for homosexuals of the time period to live, and they faced constant persecution. During Henry VIII and his son's rule, sodomy was illegal. A short time under Queen Mary, these acts were repealed and lifted. Then, once again, under Queen Elizabeth I, these acts of sodomy were rewritten, this time with the punishment of death if convicted. With this in mind, it is no surprise that there are many accusations of Michelangelo's homosexuality, but none of them with definitive proof. The list of those accused of being with him include a 17-year-old Tommaso Cavalieri, while Michelangelo himself was 57, his younger model Febo di Poggio, Francesco Urbino, who was his servant, Bartolomeo Bettini, 18-year-old Andrea Quaratesi, and Gerardo Perini. To Bettini, he gifted a drawing of Venus and Cupid. Most notable of these encounters was of those with Cavalieri, Quaratesi, and Perini. Perini was a model that came to work for Michelangelo in 1520, and their love thrived during 1522 to 1525, and lasted until the mid-1530s. If Perini did not show up at the studio, Michelangelo would go into an episode of anxiety. He was even once quoted during one of these instances as, "I beg you not to make me draw this evening, since Perini is not here." Quaratesi was the son of a family with whom he lived with for several years. A surviving letter from Quaratesi to Michelangelo says he wanted to "crawl on all fours" to see him one night in 1532. In a different correspondence, Michelangelo drew on the back of a letter to Quaratesi himself being shot at by Cupid's arrows. Interestingly enough, Michelangelo was not known for portraits as he found humans imperfect, but one of his surviving portraits is that of Andrea Quaratesi. Tommaso Cavalieri was a 17-year-old from a respected patrician family, who was a ruling family. Michelangelo sent Cavalieri sonnets, letters, a series of drawings that included the rape of Ganymede, the punishment of Titius, and the fall of Paithon, all of which were to symbolize the fire that burned within him. The story of Ganymede was not a coincidental choice. Ganymede was a shepherd, son of a king of Troy, and his outstanding beauty made Jupiter fall in love with him. Jupiter transformed into an eagle and carried Ganymede off to Olympus, where he made Ganymede immortal and his cupbearer, one of Jupiter's only lovers that was made immortal. More interestingly, in 1863 John Addington Symonds was given access to the Buonarroti family archives in Florence. In the manuscripts of Michelangelo's poems, he found a note that was written by Michelangelo's grandnephew. He wrote that the poems cannot be published as they were originally written because they had amor viri. Translated, this means masculine love, a polite term during the Renaissance for patasteria, which means male desire. The Church's clear stance on homosexuals and the persecution of them would have created tremendous stress and conflict within Michelangelo's life. It is no wonder that after all of these conflicts, Michelangelo, who was once religious, started to despise the Church. He hated their luxuriousness and their corruption. Despite all of these issues, Michelangelo completed the Sistine. Michelangelo managed to overcome all of these conflicts and compromised his lifestyle because of his love for art and sharing what he created with the world.